course, Rock Your Interview, and we're glad you came today. And I'd just like to remind you all to make sure that you get a stamp in your senior week ticket book, remembering that if you get 3 of them, you get a free portfolio, and this is worth $30. So definitely take advantage of this opportunity. Okay, so just also wanted to remind you that when you're ready to pick up your portfolios, they're going to be ready, or they're going to be available on Friday at the Career Center and not the Alumni Center. So I know that it says that on this ticket book, but come to the Career Center to pick that up. Second floor of the student union.
So how are your parts? Are you
Okay.
ready for everything?
And make sure that you sign in if you haven't done that yet. We have these clipboards here in the front.
That's it.
And I think that is it. So now I would like to introduce our speakers. We have Daniel Hallak presenting today on Rock Your Interview, and Daniel is a, professional development specialist here at SPU, involved with the master's program in social and sustainable business management. And he's brought with him 2 students, and I will let him introduce them. So
great.
Let's give a hand for Daniel, please.
And guests. Cool. Hey, thank you so much for having us today. We're jazzed. I thought I'd bring 2 of my students because I think they're more interesting than I am. So, and they have a lot of experience with interviewing and job searching particularly. So these 2 I think will be great to give you a more recent example of some of the things you're going to be going into. So I'll give a quick introduction and then I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll jump into an agenda. Today's session, we hope it to be very interactive and discussion. So please feel free to throw out questions or engage with us, and we'll stick around afterwards to chat with you as well. So quick introduction to myself. As Carrie said, my name is Daniel. I'm an SPU alum here as a grad student, and I think interviews are the most important part of your job search because really, no matter how you get there, all of you are going to land an interview somehow, and then you're going to have to prove to the employer that you are the right person for the job. And so it's really a make or break situation. And it's one of those things that I've found you really can't wing it going in. If you go in unprepared, you're setting yourself up for failure. So our hope today is to give you the tools that you can totally rock your next interview. And my background prior to coming to SPU and working in career counseling for the last few years was in recruiting. It was really interesting to see the other side of the fence and how employers are looking at you when they're interviewing you. So our hope is that today we're going to give you all those secrets so you can go in well informed. So with that, I'll let Susie and Tiffany introduce themselves and then we'll jump in.
Okay, hi, I'm Susie Locke, and I am, we're halfway through the master's program, and I'm really excited about it. I graduated with my master's in psychology in 2008, and then since then, I thought I was going to go into nursing. I was sitting in this room taking some chemistry classes, and just kind of in the field of helping people. And in that journey last year at a networking event and also learning about how to do resumes at a similar kind of workshop, I met Daniel and learned about the master's program. I was really interested in an 11-month program of how I can get a master's in business management and really make an impact through business, and also having an opportunity to travel to China and India. If you have any questions about that, we can talk about it. And so right now I'm learning that through business I can really integrate my love for people and my passion for helping and changing the world. And it seems like a big dream, but it actually seems tangible. And I never thought I would be in business. I went into the program knowing nothing about business operations, and now I'm actually leading a team in developing a business plan and going to be taking part in a social venture competition, creating this social venture company that's going to be making an impact. So, I'm excited about intertwining my interest in this business master's program and then seeing where that ends up in maybe HR management or something along those lines. So I'm excited to be here today and talk about interviewing. We actually have our own interview workshops coming up, so this gives us a leg up on our peers. But so I'm excited to be here.
And I hired Susie and Tiffany to be my assistants because they interviewed just superbly. So that's why I wanted to bring them here today too, because they're really good at interviewing.
Tiffany.
All right. Thanks for making us feel good, Daniel. I first and foremost want to congratulate you guys. You're home stretch, almost graduated. Woo! I'm really excited about that. Okay, maybe not. Maybe you're a little scared. Maybe that's why you're here. That's okay. And I remember it wasn't that long ago that I was in your same position. It's like, oh shoot, you go home for Christmas. Everyone's like, great, you're gonna get a bachelor's degree. What are you gonna do with it? And you're like, great question. So yeah, like Daniel said, you can get the best interview or have the best application in the world, but you walk in that door and it's like, what are they gonna ask me? What am I gonna do? So hopefully during this workshop, we can get you a little bit more confident about doing that. I know for me, talking with people has never been an issue, but sometimes that's the problem. I talk a little bit too much. So for me, with interviewing, it's learning like, what should I say and what shouldn't I? And it's learning to tell your story. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. It's a little bit of my story, much like Susie. I was a psychology student at a school, much like SPU. Small school, people might not know about it if I go into an interview and say, I graduated from Hope College, okay, in Michigan. You guys probably never heard of it. So I have to somehow convince them that even though they've never heard of my school, it's worthy to hire me, right? So I came into this program hoping to get some practical experience, like Susie was saying, to kind of have that competitive edge in the interview process. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys today, and thanks for listening to us. Yeah.
Cool, so this will be our agenda. When I look at, the clicker's not gonna work, when I look at interviews, I think of 3 stages. What do you do before the interview to prepare? What do you do during the interview to impress them, and how do you follow up after the interview? We'll spend most of our time on before and during, because that's really the meat of it. And that will guide our time today. So before we jump in to the actual content, we want to get some feedback on what will make this session helpful for you.
Yeah. Cool, so I want to know a little bit more. I want to hear from you guys. Why are you here today? And this goes to anyone. Just shout it out, raise your hand, whatever.
It's not just to win this prize, right? I mean, right, if you get the sign up, you get a prize.
Portfolio. It's more than the portfolio, right?
What are you hoping to gain from today? What would you hope to leave with?
A lot more confidence in how to conduct myself in an interview, especially at software development, so I'm kind of terrified of technical interviews.
And I'm sorry, what's your name?
Mark.
Mark, thank you, Mark. Anyone else agree with Mark? Anyone have that, like, I just want to have some confidence when I go into the interview? Anyone? Okay, I see a lot of that. What about someone else?
So I know what the right thing to say and what not to say in an interview. Not to like put yourself too much out there, but maybe a little bit more to put yourself.
Cool. So yeah, what are the limitations? How do I present myself? What do I actually share and what do I not? Great. Anything else? Yeah.
Like what employers are looking for.
So the person on the other end, kind of like what Daniel was saying, they're listening to you. How do they interpret that? That's cool. Yeah.
So, what was that one?
What employers are looking for?
Okay, what they're looking for.
Okay.
And we can throw technical interviews up there too, because Mark
Yeah.
mentioned that, technical interviews.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Appearance is one.
Appearance? So how to dress?
Not just dress, like how you you want the interviewer
To perceive you?
to kind of impress you, but even just meeting yourself as well.
Cool.
Yeah, the impression, that's good, yeah.
Cool, yeah.
How to effectively prepare for an interview, like researching the company and what you should look for and what you shouldn't look for.
Yeah.
Prep, yeah, it's super important. I like that. Yeah.
Maybe it's about some cliches that sound nice, but the interviewers heard them so often that they're not effective.
Awesome. So kind of learning to set yourself apart, kind of going along with like being honest with who you actually are in the interview. Cool. When you think about, I don't know if some of you either already have interviews or are looking towards maybe having an interview, what is the thing that makes you the most nervous about it? Or like challenging, I guess. What brings on, like maybe it's just me, but when I have an interview, I get nervous. Yeah.
You want to make sure that not only are you coming, getting your questions answered, but they're comfortable answering it. And that can be nerve-wracking to try to make both of you comfortable.
Yeah.
So comfort.
So making the interviewer being comfortable,
Yeah.
okay.
You don't want to feel awkward, and you don't want to make them feel
Yeah.
awkward. That's what makes me nervous and like my first thing.
Yeah. Yeah, awkward interviews would not be a good title for this session today.
Anyone else and just kind of give you guys an idea, these are the things that we're going to hope to accomplish, right? So by the end of the session, if we haven't accomplished these, we're going to readdress. So anything that you want to make sure we address, make your time worthwhile. Yeah.
Any tips regarding like body language?
Susie's great at that. Yeah.
An idea of what kind of questions or what they're hoping to get from the interview from us.
So what the interviewer expects from you.
Yeah, in terms of like kind of your questions, I know it ranges on the interview and what
Yeah.
it is, but an idea.
Questions you could be asked, you mean, or
Yeah.
questions you should ask them?
Probably questions to be asked.
Yeah.
About the interview in general.
Like typical questions.
Yeah.
Awkward at the end of an interview where they ask you if they have any questions, do you have any questions for them, and kind of having a good idea of what things are good to ask. That's, I always found that kind of awkward.
Yeah.
Maybe some tips for phone interviews. I don't know if there's like definite tips for that.
Yep.
Great question.
Awesome question.
Great
Because
question.
Actually, for this program, I had a phone interview.
Yeah.
And it's a very different experience. It's a really great point.
Quick, on the spot. You know, pitch the program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any last minute ones before we get moving forward? Okay, these are awesome.
And I'll add too, we're gonna try to answer a lot of these as we go through, but we've saved a good chunk of time at the end when we've gone through all of our content. We'll just stop and see if you have any other questions. If not, we'll just kind of work through our little parking lot here and make sure we address those. So that's really good to help us tailor our conversation as well. Awesome.
With this here, can you guys see over the book? Okay, great. This. Okay, so, the year before.
Yeah.
All right. We did some tours this morning, so jumping into where we're at right now. So interviews are basically just two people getting together and getting to know each other, right?
No.
No? Who said no?
I think more so to get to know you than you know them.
Sounds like a personal experience recently.
So then that leads to my next question. Who's had an interview before? Who's done an interview before? Who's interviewed somebody else before? Okay, all right. So then all of us have experience with interviews. So we've had to prepare for them. What have you done that's been successful in preparation for your interviews? Yeah.
Research the company beyond what's already given, specifically in LinkedIn or something. If I'm specifically looking at some of the places I want to work for, I've looked at the income they've made, how they've progressed financially versus other companies. It's something interesting to talk about, and also talks about what their progress is. Another thing is their values, the company's morals. A lot of companies are not just money, you want to show that side, that you're about the big picture, not just valuing your job. I think both of those have been very successful for me.
Great. And what's your name?
Brown Park.
Brianna? Great. So Brianna did some prep in that she did that research on the company. What else have you done in preparation for it?
I always develop questions that I think they would ask, that type of work skills would ask, and then have my friend kind of reiterate them.
Great. And what's your name? Bijou. So Bijou set up like a mock interview situation and can brainstorm what questions that could be potentially asked. That's great. What other things have you done?
Looked up different kinds of problems that they might ask you to solve in a technical interview, gotten a couple of books about like the kinds of interviews different companies conduct, and kind of looked at small, mid-sized, large companies and kind of how their process works, and done some research about that.
Great. So more research on how the specifics of that actual interview and those technical questions that could be asked, and practicing some problems and trying to separate yourself from other candidates to be able to answer that the best way, right? Great. Any others?
Has anybody ever practiced with anyone, like either with yourself in front of the mirror or with a friend or something?
Yeah.
What was that experience like? Is it awkward? Seems to be a theme.
Do you laugh a lot? I know with my peers, I'm like, no, let me redo that. Yeah.
I find that like peer editing is hard to have discernment with someone who doesn't have that background or experience. I find better experience asking someone who's older or been in the business a while. I've been to a career fair where I've asked people who are from the company, you know, what questions they might ask or things like that in the interview before the interview. In other words, but I don't know, what suggestions do you have in terms of asking people who are other than peers? Because I find that
So you feel that doing like a mock interview with your peers is less effective than with somebody that's more experienced?
yes, I feel the feedback is just not as effective.
Right, it's hard to tell your peers, like, no, you answered that question in a way that didn't make any sense. You're like, yeah, good job, you're going to do great. Right? That's more likely the feedback you're going to get. And as just a suggestion right now is if you have a mentor in your life or somebody that you can trust, or, you know, like right now I'm still really close with my high school nurse, and she and I talk with her a lot, and she's really good at giving me critical feedback. So just reaching out to a professor or somebody you know that you can talk to, and so just setting up that mentorship and being able to ask some questions there. So do you have anybody that is a mentor in your life that you can reach out to? Yeah, do you reach out to them regularly, or is it maybe a relationship that you can start creating so you have that as a resource in the future? Yeah, so that's my
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what if remind me, is your name Mark? With the technical stuff? Okay, so I'm not in tech at all, right? So let's theoretically say I'm going to be an engineer. And I don't know any engineers, and I'm going to go into an engineering interview, like I don't have anyone in my network that knows anything about engineering interviews, because if you came to me asking me, I would say, I don't know, I couldn't help you. So what are other resources you guys have, if you don't already have that person in your life, to be connected with someone that, like you said back there, would actually give you valuable feedback? What are resources you didn't have here? Yeah.
I would say for Mark, I'm not sure, are you in comp sci or something? Yeah, comp sci, yeah, you definitely would have done this. I'm definitely ready to say.
You definitely have correct.
But no, I would say for him, any of the minority clubs like IEEE or going to some type of minority engineering club, they might have, other professions of people who are in the field that need us to help you with things of that nature and have a better background. As well as some of the professors on campus that have been in industry versus been a professor.
Cool. Yeah, because I would just,
I was just going to say, take advantage of using the mentor program that we have here. You can sign up. They help you find mentors, and you can change different mentors and choose who the best match.
yeah, Daniel often tells us, like, use your student card. Okay, you guys have, like, 2 quarters left? You guys are in the quarter system, it confuses me, but I think that means you have 2 quarters left of having your student card. That means, like, use that. Say, I'm a student at SPU, I want to get into engineering, I want to get into this, I'm about to have an interview, I have no idea what this means. You have resources of people that even if you don't know them, would love to help you. So don't be afraid, even if you already don't have those people in your network, you can find those people that help you.
Absolutely, and this is awesome to hear. So I mean, in terms of preparation, it's imperative. You have to prepare. If you don't prepare, you pretty much it's going to be a wash. I love the things I heard from whether it be finding people or practicing with a friend and coming up with questions and doing your research, looking up technical questions. Like just picture you with a book spread out and practicing. That's awesome. So a number of things you do. First off is do your research, and I heard that here is a clear theme. Do as much research as you possibly can. I love how Brianna put it, to get deeper than just what's out there typically. Do your research. From your research, know your value, and then practice answering questions, are kind of the 3 easy things to do. So in terms of research, there's a number of ways you can do it, and I love that discussion about the IEEE or clubs or the mentor program, or just even thinking of what resources you already have at your fingertips, because the reality is you have so many more resources that you don't even think of in your day-to-day. So a couple things. I mean, obviously, first one, the website. Funny thing, one of my best friends was interviewing a position. He's a senior leader at a retirement home of all places. And a guy came in, he was joking with me about how funny it was that halfway through the interview, the guy said, "So, do you serve an elderly population? And he goes, what? We're a retirement home, like, get out of here. I mean, it was just kind of, what are you talking about, right? So, I mean, that's an extreme example, but do your research. You shouldn't ask dumb questions you can find online. Google, LinkedIn, the company website. You can find a ton of information, figure out what the company's about. I love looking at their company performance and financials. You just took it to all-star level. So there's a lot of information at your fingertips to figure out readily, what is the company about? The job description is a great one. Now, because today employers don't often have to pay for line space in a newspaper, you have these great big job descriptions. So take some time and read it. Oftentimes you'll read through and you'll see, oh, you know, it looked like a robot wrote the job description, and then randomly a human typed something in. You go, whoa, that looked like a human wrote that. That's an indication of what they want. So an example, my wife was at an office that had a lot of grumpy people, and she was really bright and cheery. And then when she left, we were laughing. We saw the job description, and somewhere randomly in there, same job description she had for years, it said, looking for someone who brings sunshine to the office. That's what her boss always told her about her. You go, seriously? That's not real. You know, and so look for these little things that you either say, okay, this is not typical, or even more important, when you look at a job description, you see themes. You say, they asked for that same thing 5 times, 7 different ways. What? Okay, that must be a clear theme. And so by looking online, looking at the job description, you can kind of cull out what the heck is the position actually entailing, right? Beyond that, I'm a huge advocate of finding people in the company, right? So with LinkedIn, and I know Rick's an expert on LinkedIn, you could always ask him questions or go to his workshop on LinkedIn, plug for Rick, is you can find anybody on LinkedIn. So when I was a grad student here, 2 experiences happened. First, small consulting firm really wanted to work for them, just really wanted to work for them. Got an interview, was excited, and did all the things I taught people, looked online, not a lot of information, and I thought, I don't know anything about this company other than their shell of a website. So I went on LinkedIn, found a woman who used to work in the position that I was applying for, interviewing for 5 years. She had recently left to Chicago. So I reached out to her. She had a 30-minute conversation, and she told me, she said, these are the 3 things they're going to look for. Thanks. That saved me a whole ton of time. So I went into that interview, I tailored my questions and the whole package, and I pretty much addressed those 3 things the whole time. In fact, it went so well, at one point the guy goes, man, you seem to know so much about this operating model. I'm going, yeah. Don't tell him. But it was positive. It's probably one of the best interviews I had, not because I was outstanding, but I just knew what they were looking for. And all of you are talented, multidimensional people who have a variety of skills. And so you don't know what they're exactly looking for that you can bring to the table. So if you can find out, you know that you can tell them about those 3 things rather than the other myriad of talents you have, right? Another situation, I had another interview around the same time with a firm. I did the same thing. I thought, hey, it worked once. Had another conversation and learned I did not want to work for the company. I heard about being on call, the evenings and weekends, I thought, whoa, I don't want to do that. And so that helped me make a decision. And so we'll talk more, Brianna, about what you're saying about, I actually think the best interviews should be a 2-way street, and they'll usually make it one way. You got to try to make it an engagement. But you should learn as much as you can about the opportunity too. So do excellent research. Start with what we already have, and then move a little bit further. I've seen people use LinkedIn to find competitors or collaborators or other folks who work with that company, current employees, past employees. There's a lot of things you can do. But get beyond just looking online, and if you need help, ask someone in the Career Center. Ask a mentor you've had. Sign up for the mentor program. Find somebody. It's easy. You have all the resources here to do that, and your interview will be way better. So in terms of research, do as much as you can and figure out what are the 3 to 5 things that they need in that position. They probably want 17 in their job description, but it really boils down to 3 to 5. What are those core things? And then you start thinking of those things and you try to package it like this. Based on what they're looking for, how can you help them make money, save money, or make their life easier? We just took a company tour this morning to 2 nonprofits. It was a great experience. But guess what? Even in a nonprofit, they're focused on they have limited resources. How can we make the best use of what we already have, or how can we bring more funding in? So anywhere you go, you have to think of what is the business reason that your position exists. Another way to think about it would be, if this if they were not hiring this job, what type of headache would the manager have? And then tell them how you can solve that. An example would be, I always go to Tully's, and so I see the shift supervisors there. If their baristas don't show up, guess what? They have to do everything. They have to make the drinks, they have to, do the schedule, they have to do the inventory, they have to, the whole thing. So if you can figure out, and that's an easy example to think of, right? But if you can think of, if that position wasn't there, what would they be missing? You now know the problem that they're eager to solve, and then you can go solve that problem with those 3 to 5 things you know that they're looking for. Make sense? So it's not rocket science, but it takes thought. And this is how you can separate yourself from the competition, is giving it some thought and taking the time to put yourself in their shoes and say, what would they be looking for if I were them? So ideally, you've got this awesome interview, you're ready to rock it, you've done your excellent research, you've thought through how you can help them. And then the key thing, I got this actually from Patty Farmer in the Career Center, is think of the cards you bring to an interview. So I like to imagine you were bringing 3 cards in your back pocket, and those 3 cards represented the 3 things that by your careful research and analysis you determined are most important for those situations, right? Now, you won't literally bring those cards out. That would be super awkward. Could you imagine that? So, why should we hire you? Right there. Don't do that, right? But what I mean is, go in and think through what are the 3 reasons. So you've done your great research. The woman I talked to told me the 3 things they're looking for. So here's what I did. I went through and developed stories. Stories are powerful. We were talking on the car ride over here. I remember a sermon I went to in high school where a guest preacher talked about shooting BB guns at cars as a kid under the bridge, and he was like 8 or 9, and then the cops came after him. I remember that story surprisingly well. I don't remember anything else he talked about. I don't remember the passage, the message. I can barely remember his name. So stories are memorable, and all of you have stories from your academic experience, from internships, club leadership, projects, extracurriculars. Anything you have done is experience. So if you go in there and you know the 3 things they're looking for, come up with at least 2 stories for each. So I give an example for myself from when I had this job. I thought, okay, I know they want me to build relationships with people. So, okay, what are 2 examples I have? I know they want me to do some teaching. What are 2 examples I have? I know they want me to do some coaching. What are 2 examples I have? And stories are rich. Now, one of the things, there's common interview questions that you're likely to get asked. So, just to rattle off a couple, someone's going to probably ask you, tell me about yourself, or your strengths and weaknesses, or what your future career plans are, or a challenging situation you faced, or something about conflict, or there's some of these things that if you just Googled most common interview questions, or went to the Career Center and asked them for a list, they give you a list, and you can find those, and you should plan a canned answer to that. So when somebody says, "What are your weaknesses?" it shouldn't be, I've never thought of that. I don't like peanut butter in my cookies. True fact. But that should not be the first time you thought about that, right? You need to that should be prepared way in advance. But there's these tricky questions where somebody says, hey, could you give me an example of when you handled multiple competing priorities simultaneously and you failed? Dang. No. You don't want to have those answers. But if you have a story, each story is multifaceted. So I can think of a story for preparing for a workshop, for instance, right? And maybe it would have an example of collaborating with people, or an example of delivering something, or an example of doing research. Really, any story you have probably can answer a dozen questions, or at least a handful, right? So if you know the 3 things they want, and you think of 2 stories that you're passionate about, and you think of them fully, you can use those stories throughout your interview. And if you used 6 stories for 3 themes, if you had 6 stories and you used each story twice, you could cover a lot of ground, answer pretty much any question they're going to ask you, and you don't look like you're a one-story show with the same story again and again and again and again, right? So I was a Boy Scout in high school. I could talk about a Boy Scout project, which could answer project planning and conflict and managing people when I had no experience. And all these different things, right? So you know the 3 things that they want. And you're going to tell them you can do that for every question they ask you, because you're going to give them a story that highlights that based on your experience. Make sense? And again, like the preacher who I remember the BB gun story, you remember those things. They'll just stick in your head and it's like, oh yeah, that was the gal who had that one project, or did that internship at World Vision, or did that leadership thing on campus, or who had that really interesting story about her class project that was somehow fascinating. And she was really excited about it, right? So think through your stories. So you might be thinking now, okay, that makes sense. Do your research, know what they're looking for, tell some stories that line up with it. So that begs the question, well, how do you tell a good story? Some of us are more natural at storytelling and others it's harder. So there's a lot of ways to go about it, but one of the acronyms that I love, and there's a lot of variants, is a PAR statement. You start with the problem. So what was the problem or issue that you faced? What were the actions that you took individually to remedy it? And what were the results for the company? So again, the problem. Okay, this was the challenge. We had 5 weeks to complete this project, and none of us had ever done it before. And so we were trying to figure out how to make it happen. And here's the actions that I took. Now, some people say, what if it was part of a group? Great. Say, as a group we did this, but this is my piece, right? You need to talk about what you did within the group. So you state the problem or issue, you talk about what you did to actually solve it, and then you give them the result. This is a great question for when people ask you, a great way to handle what's called a behavioral interview question, where somebody says, tell me about a time when, give me an example of, describe a situation, or how would you handle this? So a behavioral question, something, tell me about your past, or how would you handle this scenario? Stories are the best way to answer it. Some of the questions, tell me about yourself, are more open-ended, but for behavioral questions, and I promise all of you will have those if you haven't, a PAR statement is one of the best ways to do it. So again, I would encourage you to think through your background and write down a number of these, because then you can have these powerful little vignettes in your interview. So for,
Can I add
yeah, absolutely.
I know that at least my experience as an undergrad, I was like, I haven't had a lot of experience.
Mm.
And a lot of times when you look at these things, you're like, stories, like for me, it's like I had one part-time job at a camp. So I'm like, what stories do I have? And I think what I learned through that process was it doesn't necessarily have to be a professional experience where you had a job and you know, it was like this formal thing where you're like, I had this project. And even out of those social stories, so I know like in undergrad, my house was like the pancake house, and we put on these huge like pancake breakfasts, and we were in charge of pretty much feeding the whole campus with free pancakes. It was awesome. And so that's like a social thing. You wouldn't think about that as a story in an interview, but the way that comes out is when that was happening, my whole house was in the kitchen, and my job was to talk to everyone. There was a reason why that was. Now, again, like that isn't, that you think that's something social, that what you do on the weekend, that doesn't belong in the interview. But there's a place for me to say, this is where I can step out, support my team, and interact with people I didn't know. And so don't undervalue the power of your experiences. And like Daniel said, like really take time to think through, like what are stories I can draw on? Because like Daniel said, if you have questions that you like didn't expect, you kind of already have in your repertoire like the stories you can pull from, as opposed to trying to make them up as you go along, going through that story, practicing writing it out, and so by the time you get to the interview, you know exactly how you're going to say it too.
And let me add to that. That reminds me, is a funny, winging interviews and actually thinking through your stories carefully. Never ever wing an interview. I'm pretty good at winging it, and I never wing an interview. The last time I winged an interview, I was a lifeguard. I was 16, and I went in. They asked me 2 questions, checked my pulse, and gave me a job. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, great. You can swim? Awesome. So, but it was a little more than that. But you get what I'm saying, right? And then if you're going to be competing for an internship or a job after graduation, it's not like the lifeguard job anymore. They actually want to see that you can articulate who you are. So my favorite example, I was an intern here at SPU in the Career Center, and a student came to me, and she had an interview. And she showed me her resume. She said, can I get some resume feedback? And it was an atrocious resume. It was like an essay. But she said, I have an interview. And I said, well, who cares about the resume? Then you talk about your interview. She said, no, I'm really good at winging it. So I thought, okay. Okay. And I just heard this great interview question. So I asked her, I said, just to humor me, could you tell me your top 3 strengths and their corresponding weaknesses? And she goes, Okay, need help interviewing. And it just illustrated the point that you might think you're good at winging it until they ask you that question and you go, dang it, I don't know. And you can't say, I'm just awesome and my weakness is the same thing. You know, that doesn't work. So think through it carefully. And I love what you said, Tiffany. Those examples, they don't have to be ginormous. I saved the company $17 billion and I got a plaque. Wow, good for you. It can be something small or simple or something you would think would be simple.
And that's a great place for a friend to help because you don't necessarily need feedback, you just need to practice saying it to another human being.
Absolutely.
And that really helps. I have an example of an interviewing mishap. I told a story that I had never told before. I was like, ooh, this is a good answer to that. I never thought of this story again before in my life, but now it happened, so I'm going to tell it because it seems really applicable. And I ended up telling like the end first, and it was all jumbled. And so they were distracted by how I told the story. And the punchline, it was like telling a bad joke. You're like, yeah, here's the punchline, and the rest doesn't matter. So having it organized and structured, written out in practice is really helpful.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get the job. So
You don't want the first time you say the question to be, you don't want the first time you answer that to be in an interview, to practice it.
yeah, so
So-
one more question after that. That's it.
So I want you to practice this. I'm not gonna have you write down all your experiences, but here's a number of potentially common interview questions. So I'll come back to this slide in a second, but I want you to pick one, just for one question. I'll come back to it. And I want you to do is, I want you to write a par statement, then you're gonna pair up, and you're just gonna share your par with each other. No pressure, you don't have to grill each other. Just to start practicing it, because just like Susie, that's a perfect example of what Susie just said. If you haven't articulated it once or twice, it's gonna come out sounding like you have gravel in your mouth, right? So pick a question, take a couple minutes, 2 or 3, I'll kind of watch how people are doing, and just write down an example. It could be bullet points, could be a novel, I don't really care. And write down a problem, an action, and a result for a question that you might say, I don't know how I would answer that right now. Take a couple minutes, and we'll pair you up. We'll awkwardly observe you, just kidding. We'll just kind of roam around, see how you're doing. Hey, so let's bring it back together. So tell me, how did it go? You wrote down your par, you shared it with your neighbor, and hopefully got a little bit of feedback. How was that experience of sharing, and what was that like?
Well, it was awkward at first, but
Why was it awkward at first?
I never really put that into words.
Which is why you can see how that would be super awkward if that was the interview situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think starting a story is always, I think, the hardest part because you have to set the scene properly, and then you're like saying random things like, oh wait, but I was here. So I think formulating that is probably the hardest part of the story for me personally.
Yeah.
So you're not just jumping around, but so it's clear and you're saying what needs to be.
And that's part of the value of writing it down. You can kind of, even if it's bullet points, see the logical progression, and you have at least a template as you practice. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a comment too?
I was just going to say, knowing what details are important for the story to make logical sense and get your point across of what you're trying to portray that you did or the action you took. So just knowing.
So how did you do that? I mean, there's lots of details in a story. So how did you or others think through which details to share, which to exclude? Because that's a in the moment decision.
I just went through and thought about what I actually had done, and then not giving too much backstory, but just kind of giving brief specifics, just enough so they can have a visual picture maybe in their head of what it actually looked like, and then going through of just she did this, and then that was the result, and just being kind of clear on not too many details.
Yeah. What was your name?
Isabel.
I love the visual picture analogy. I'll get to your question in a second. I love the visual picture because I often think of these stories like a movie. You know, all of your experience is your life, and as if the movie was a shortened version of that, and we're just watching the trailer. So you literally just want to get just a picture. So I love that. So they can just picture, is Isabella? Isabel. They want to picture Isabel doing whatever her story entailed, rather than just a dry list of facts. So yeah, that's really good.
I kind of went with that, like with how long it should go, so details also how much to talk about details. I feel like just rattle on.
Yeah. No, and I do that too because I like to talk, and so, typically what the rule of thumb, minute and a half, 2.5 minutes, kind of watch your audience. Any shorter than that's probably too short. Any longer than that's probably too long. But you might be going along, let's spend a minute and a half, you might kind of pause and say, or you might go through it faster and say, is there any more details you'd like to hear, or was there a part that I could share to give you further information? Or you just kind of watch their body language, and if they're really engaged, you might keep going a little bit more, and if it's, you see them glazing, tiger in the cage thing, you might pull it back. So typically around 2 minutes-ish, I would say. Anyone else? A great question. Anyone else? What was this like doing this for the first time? How was this helpful for you? Yeah.
I guess it was helpful, even though I wrote it down and it seemed logical, like on the page. Then immediately right after that, going to say it, I was like, I had to go back and read what I just had written.
Yeah.
Because speaking is different than writing.
Totally different than writing. That makes me think too. Did any of you hear a good example that maybe you didn't deliver, but in hearing someone else's story, you said, "Wow, I learned something neat from the way they presented it"? Not to throw your partner on the spot. Yeah.
I know my partner told me about something that she dealt with that was unethical. It was a refreshing approach because it didn't really sound Protestant. She didn't just say, well, this was wrong, so, I went with this. She particularly said she was trying to be sympathetic toward her friend. She said it was tempting to help her friend in a situation. However, her friend was doing something unethical, and she wanted to keep in line with the companies.
Wow.
So she took the gripe from her friend and decided it was more important to be true to the value.
And what I love about that too is that's a tough question. How do you answer a question about something unethical you faced or dealt with? There's not really an easy answer to that, and so I love that. I heard that there's a lot of graciousness in that answer, and so it was explained in a way that identifies the challenge that was faced, but in a gracious way that was positive, rather than, yeah, well, that was just wrong and that was that, or, well, they should have just made the right decision. But we're really showing an understanding of the nuance, and so you're still connecting. That's really good, really good. Anything else? Maybe one or two more things that you learned from someone in their sharing their story. You're smiling, so it makes me think that you had one. Not to pick on you.
One of the only stories that came to mind. I have a hard time just recalling off the cuff, but it's about mediation, how to kind of help people be able to see a compromise where a situation might be becoming more tense than it needs to be over an issue where some points of view are conflicting, pride, is getting hurt. So just,
Yeah, the way it's conveyed is just as important as what happened in these situations. Yeah. Anyone else?
It's important to see your story as a tool. So just like when you have a great professor, they can tell you this is how you do this mathematical equation X, Y, Z. But if they tell you a story of how to use that in a real world situation, it's just more engaging. So all you're doing is using the story to say some solid points without being boring, without saying oh, well, I'm very responsible and organized. It's well, that's not convincing. So even kind of not manipulating your story, but kind of to say these are the points I want to make because I know this is true about myself. So I'm going to use the story to exemplify. And I heard a lot of questions about what do I know how to say and how long and those kind of questions. It's what do I want to say through my story? And making sure you hit those main points, and that will kind of guide your storytelling, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, that's key. So in the interview, so we talked about before the interview, right? You do your excellent research, you find out what they're looking for, you craft the things that you think that they want, and then you develop stories. In the interview, you answer questions as best as you can with these examples, with something from your past, and you practice and prepare, mock interviews, talk to folks, and you practice the common interview questions. The other thing during the interview, other than telling stories, that I think is the most powerful, is asking really good questions. And I have seen interviews, if I skip over here, always ask good questions. The worst thing you can do is say, I don't have any questions to ask. Or as Rick and I were chatting about in the break with Tiffany, asking a dumb question, like, well, what do you do for your company? But you have to have good questions. And can anyone tell me why? Why do good questions make a difference in an interview? I mean, they're interviewing you, so why should you care about having good questions for them? Yeah.
You want to show that you're interested in not just the interview and the job, but what comes along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And by asking questions, you show you know something about them to show your interest. Yeah. What else? What else would asking questions show? Why else would asking questions be helpful to you in an interview? Yeah.
I think it just shows that you are willing to take the next initiative beyond just taking things from it, just listening. Like, I'll do this, that, but to kind of question, but then show that as you be an important asset to that company, because then when you work for that company, when you work for other people, you ask them, hey, what about this and that? Just kind of push the company to grow even more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Asking questions in an interview, I have seen poor interviews that have been saved by great questions and great interviews that have tanked because of poor questions. So you could be rocking it, you're going, oh, I've got all these stories and I've practiced and I'm slick. And then you get to the questions you have none and your interview just drops. Or you can kind of be okay and then ask really good questions. So for those of us who do feel nervous, we all feel nervous going into an interview, but sometimes that affects us more than others, and so you might go through going, gosh, that was not my strongest interview. You can save it with the questions. I had an example, the previous job I had, we had an interview panel with 8 people, it's just intimidating. This guy had a decent interview, it wasn't great, it wasn't poor, it was just decent. But when we asked him, do you have any questions for us? And we're tired, we're thinking, okay, ready to get it done. He started asking question upon question based on super intelligent research. And as he went along, it went from just having a conversation like this to we were side by side working on a business problem. It felt like he was one of our coworkers. And through the questions, he was even able to ask us about, have you thought of partnering with this organization? Here's some information I brought about them. We're going, he's already added value to us. We're going, yeah, we should know about that. He's already added value to us. He hasn't even been hired. He got the job, right? Other people had better interviews in terms of question and answer, but his question showed he had done his research. It showed he was the right fit, and we actually got to really see who he was more than just the question response. So good questions are one of the most important ways that you can ace an interview. One of the students in our program from a couple years back had this happen too. We went through together and sat down and carefully worked out a good list of questions. He went in for the interview. First thing the guy said was, okay, I'm going to flip the interview and I'm going to ask you what questions you have for me first. We'll take about 40 minutes for that and then I'll ask you questions at the end. Whoa! What happens if you don't have 40 minutes of questions? You may as well just go home. Hey, thanks. Here's your water back. So you have to have good questions. And beyond that, if you ask good questions, you start engaging them on a peer dialogue. So remember how I said you need to show them how you can make money, save money, make their life easier? If you know what they're looking for and you ask good questions based on that, you all of a sudden show them that you understand the problems they are facing and that you might even be able to help solve them. So one of the questions I often get asked from an audience of this demographic is, how do I get a job that I'm not qualified for? Or what happens when I'm interviewing for a job where I'm probably the youngest, most inexperienced person? Well, experience is important, employers want that, but I have heard and do see examples all the time where someone with less experience who understands what's going on, or as the employer says, they get it, the person who gets it is more likely to get the job than the person who might have a couple more years of experience. So if that's you, you have to ask good questions, and it becomes a dialogue, right? Ideally, when they ask you if they have any questions for you, you have a set list of 10 or so, and maybe you have your top 3 you're going to ask, and if they let you keep going, you keep going. But I would also encourage you ask questions during the interview. So Brianna had said the point, yeah, well, interviews are usually about them interviewing you, and you're right. My experience has been is the worst interviews are a firing squad. You get up there, you take a hit, and then You kind of recover and ask them questions, right? The best interviews are a volley. They're a tennis match where you're playing together and they ask you a question, you become a dialogue, right? Through that dialogue process, they start looking at you as more of a peer than just kid out of college, right? So here's what that looks like. You might have your list of questions at the end. You might try to sprinkle them through. Let's say somebody asks you a question such as, Mark, tell me about an example of a time when, you had a interpersonal conflict with somebody at work and it could have hampered the project and you had to solve it. What did you do? So you're going, yes, prepared to answer for that. I've got it. You answer it instead of just going, I'm awesome. You answer a question and you ask the question back to them. So you might turn it back and say, that was a great question. It made me think in this type of line of work, I know it's really competitive when you're shipping a product. So what are some of the typical conflicts that you've seen folks on your team face in the past and how have they handled those? Well, let me tell you what's going to happen. All of a sudden they get talking and you figure out, oh, this is what their conflict looks like. So they tell you and you go, oh, that reminds me, and you bring in another example because now you know what they're actually asking about, right? So it becomes a dialogue. Tell me about this conflict. Great, why does that happen? Okay, this is why it happens. Oh, you know what, this is what I've done, that situation reminds me. Wow, great, that's impressive, let's keep going. So it becomes more of a dialogue. So you have to think on your feet. How can you ask good questions? So,
and then
yeah.
To add to that too, do you have any psychology students, maybe people sociology, whatever, a little bit of human behavior? If you think about it, an interview, we think about it's a formal process. The interviewer just wants to talk to me. But the interviewer is also human, and if you think about it, if you've ever had a one-sided conversation, it's super tiring. And as much as they have those questions and they know they have to ask it to you, they're also at work. It's almost like you're making it more fun for them. You're making it more of an enjoyable experience to have that two-sided conversation because what Daniel's saying, most people don't do that. So they're not used to that. So they're used to going out of an interview super drained. So if you can switch it and make it about them more than about you, people love that. And also if you think about just the way that you approach interviews, I think we think about a lot about I just have to get a job, but you also want to make sure the job is right for you.
Absolutely.
Nothing's worse than wasting your time with an application interview process when you realize one, this isn't the job I was expecting, or this isn't the job I want. And so the interview process is also for you because when you get 3 job offers and you have to make a decision and all you have is a website to decide, isn't it so much better to know that you have all this information from your interview to say well, based on those questions that I asked, it's not just about you looking impressive. It's about you getting the information that you want to know when you're making that decision. So think about yourself too. That's the reason. It's a two-way conversation, but it's also for you. You're interviewing them. Do I want to work for you?
And if they can't answer any of your questions or they don't want to answer your questions, I don't know how many questions they're going to answer for you and you start expecting to get trained and they don't because they don't like you to ask them questions.
Yeah. And I had last year where I worked, I had an interview with 3 people, much like Daniel's saying, and then they said, great, our executive director wants to talk to you. So again, a follow-up interview, right? So I'm dude, I want to work here, this is really exciting. The executive director comes on and was I didn't really super chill, right? And I'm super prepared and I've studied the mission statement and I'm ready. And I have all these questions ready for him. He's I don't know, do you have any questions? And I had so many, but he gave me 5 minutes. So I had to choose what were the questions that were most important for me to know. And that was, if I wouldn't have had any questions, I wouldn't have had a conversation with him. And that he was the person at the end of the day that said yes or no to me. So again, one, prioritize your questions because you might get 40 minutes or you might get 2. So which ones are the most important for you to know? But also know that that might be the most of the conversation. And if some of you are saying I'm, asking questions or answering questions isn't my forte, being put on the spot, it's you're giving yourself an advantage to say what I am good at is preparing myself for something that I can prepare myself for. So asking questions you can prepare for. They can't stump you on the questions that you're going to ask yourself. So even if, like Daniel said, you bomb that side of the interview, you're giving yourself a step up, leveraging that to say, at least I can do good on this part. So prepare yourself for success in that way.
And Tiffany, did you bring, when you go into the interview, do you bring a list of questions with you or you try to memorize your hoard?
No, I definitely, I had a lot of phone interviews, kind of like she mentioned, so I would have them written down. But I think at the end of the day, I had them so ingrained in my head, so both. I always had them with me.
Yeah.
But I guess, yeah, if I go into the interview, I don't usually refer to them.
Okay.
But
But it's totally okay. It's
Yeah.
totally kosher to bring your interview questions with you.
But yeah,
I set it on the table.
Yeah.
Resume questions. Let's go.
Yeah, I'll forget under pressure, the nerves.
Yeah.
I know which questions that I want. I bold the ones that I want to ask for priority for sure, and then the rest, can give or take a few. But I'll highlight whatever. I'm the one that writes in books. You highlight it. You can't return it because it's all messed up now. So I like to have it with me, and I think coming in, you can put it in a little envelope,
Or
and
your
you
portfolio
set it
that
up.
you get after going to 3 of these, is that what you have? That's what this
Yeah,
is for, okay?
bring it with you. You come in all prepared, your briefcase.
Absolutely. So my favorite thing on a slide here, do your research. Ask really great questions that set yourself up for a home run. And what that looks like is you've done your research, so you know, all right, this company is having a trouble, I'm gonna make something up, continuing to retain their customers. They just have awful customer service. And you know that because you've done your research. So that you go in and you ask them, tell me about your customer retention strategies. You put the softball on the tee and you just gave them an easy one. They tell you about it and you go, oh, really? And then it gives you a chance to dialogue and smack it back to them about how you can help with customer retention, yada, yada. And they're going, wow, not only does this person know our problems, but they can help us too. And you're going, yeah, I just did research. And you'd think, the reason we're talking today, you'd think that everyone does this, but they don't. Most people don't. Most people don't look up the financial statements of a company. People don't do this. So just by doing your homework, and pretty sure you're all in school, you're all trained at doing research and homework. You do what you've done your whole lives, and you can find out excellent information. So ask excellent questions, can set you up for success and help you find the right fit. Because I know most of you don't just want to get a job. We're here to engage the culture and change the world, and I'm sure that strikes the heart of some of you, most of you, all of you. So you want to find the right fit where you can make a difference. So,
Daniel, I just want to address
yeah.
like earlier on, a question was asked about how long do I talk about my story. You talked a little bit about body language, but can you talk more in detail the body language that I maybe can look for when I'm interviewing that says like, oh, I'm talking so a lot too long, or I don't know, like what are the cues that
I'm going to let Susie talk because Susie's our body language expert. She was just doing that, looking at her watch and...
Okay, so I have 11 years of experience doing sign language interpreting. So you do a lot of facial expressions, a lot of hand stuff. Body language is something that I am very sensitive to. And some people are not, some people are, but I think generally we have a good concept of body language. And so it looks like to be engaged. The lean in, they're copying your hand movements, you're kind of doing the lean back, you're leaning in, it's that mutual, I'm listening to you, but then when it's time to wrap up, they're breathing a little louder, they're looking at the clock, there's that little glance,
The pen fidget.
Yeah, the pen fidget, or the quick look under the table at their phone. So those are kinds of things to start picking up on. And the other thing that's subtle is when they go, and say the same one twice in a row, and say it a little louder the second time, like, okay, yeah, great.
Finish. Finish.
So that's something something that you can hear. So other engaging things, just that they keep interrupting, or they're like, oh, okay, great. And you're still telling your story. That's usually that word is generally a good cue. So
on the flip side, I as the interviewee, what's appropriate body language for me to show in the interview?
So if you want to be engaged, is that lean in, show that you're interested. Also be careful of verbal interrupting during questions. So if they're asking you a question, say It's hard to listen to the full question if you interrupt during. So that's something that I've experienced firsthand. So I like to let them know that I'm hearing them, but then sometimes I miss an important part of the question because I'm trying to show that I'm engaged a little bit too much. So just the subtle lean in, hands on the table, not fidgeting with a pen if you can help it, taking notes.
And I'd say be enthusiastic. Some people try to play it cool. Be excited. You don't have to be over the top, but be excited. They want to hire someone who's going to be excited about the job, not, I need a job. I'm cool. You need me. Be excited, and also listen carefully to the question so you answer the question. One of my pet peeves in interviews, I see it all the time, is you ask a question and they give you an answer that was really not what you asked. So pay attention. If you don't know it,
Yeah. And
that's okay.
You can mirror back the question too if you're not sure if that happened, like what Susie was saying. Okay, so what you're asking, just to clarify, you're asking this.
Yeah.
And that gives you, so that you don't ramble on for.
It gives you a little bit of time to think more and clarify what they're actually looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So lean in, be engaged, and be excited, and that goes a huge long way for you in terms of body language.
The people that are doing the interviews, they know that you're nervous and they'll generally be respectful of that, but sometimes they'll use it as leverage for the interview. Okay, you're under pressure, how are you going to react? So just trying to be calm, cool, stuff together.
So with that, I mean, again, key takeaways: do your research and prepare. Tell some stories. Have awesome questions. Those are our big 3 takeaways. With that, we've got a nice little list here. Let me just quickly end with this. When you finish, let them know that you're interested in the job. If they ask you, is there anything else we should know? Just tell them, yeah, these are the 3 things I bring to the table. I mean, just, this is why I think I'd be a good fit, 1, 2, 3, if you haven't already told them that. And find out what the next steps are, when they'll get back to you, and let them know you'd actually be excited. You can follow up, get them a business, get their business card, send them an email and a thank you card, and you should be good to go. Again, we'll send this out via email.
Can I interrupt real quick about
Yes.
the thank you card? I have a friend that got a job just because they sent a thank you card. The interview, she said it was terrible, didn't really like it, but she sent a handmade, you don't have to do it handmade, but it's just kind of what she did. Sent a handmade thank you card, thank you for your time and for meeting with me. They called her the next day and they said the reason that she got the job is because she was the only one out of all of their applicants that said thank you.
And it shows she can follow up, and she'll probably do that in her job. It means she won't drop the ball on anything. So, yeah. So, ladies, let's attack this list. Where should we start? And we can add things too. But let's jump into what we have, and let's cross it. We've talked about, I think, body language.
Yep.
I think we've talked a lot about how to prep.
Okay.
We haven't talked about. We talked about. Do we answer the typical questions? Do you feel good about that? Typical questions for us, for you? Let's cross off typical questions.
Do we want to address maybe some questions you could ask them? Like, are there some generic
Great
questions
questions.
to ask?
Yeah. So, Tiffany, Susie, what would you, if you're asking questions in an interview, what are your handful or a couple of your tried and true best? I'm going to ask this question.
I like to ask the question, what are the most conflicts that arise among your employees? I like to know that because I'm going to be working with them. So what kind of conflicts arise? They just not like each other? Is there a lot of arguments? That was one of them.
And my favorite question is like, what do you need from me? So if I was to take this position, what would you need for me to do? And what's the best value I can bring to your company? That helps them because that puts them in a position to be honest. It also puts me in a position to still gear my interview in a way that I can prove that I can be that person.
Another question on my list is, what's your ideal employee? Because then I like to follow up with maybe some of those qualities, those words, and throw them in a couple of my answers.
Related question to both of those is how will success be measured in this role? So I like to find out, do you actually know what success is going to look like? And if so, that helps me understand, can I even deliver?
I personally like feedback, so I like to ask what's the evaluation process for your employees. Is there a 6-month evaluation, the first month, that kind of thing?
My favorite questions are around needs, their needs and challenges. So I always want to find out, again, what are the pain points that they're facing. If you can figure out their pain points, you can do a lot with that, and then you know how to show up when you come to the job. So a question like that could be, there's I'm sure there's lots of things going well and other things you'd love to fix. If there's one thing you'd fix in this position, or in this department, or if there's one problem or challenge that if you could just wave a wand, it would go away. What would that problem be, and how is that causing you issues right now? And then let them talk about it.
And then in inverse, just why they work there, what they like about the
Yeah.
company, how they're tied to the mission. Again, that gives you an opportunity to maybe figure out something that you would never know on a website. Like, I really love the people I work with. I really like the company culture. Whatever, things like that. There's no way you would have known that otherwise. Yeah.
Do you not feel that falls into the category of cliche? I feel that question.
Which question?
Gets hit on the head a lot. Why do you join a company?
Yeah.
Rather than maybe why did you stay in the company or what makes you stay?
Sometimes I think there's value in cliche. I like that question.
So the cliche is a tricky one. I mean, it depends how it's asked. So if I was asked, why did you stay at the company? I'd say probably the context is the right point. So if somebody asks you, what are you looking for? You get in a dialogue. So, what are you hoping for in an opportunity? So you might tell them a few things and say, out of curiosity, it makes me think, what made you stay at this company? What are the core values that you hold to? Or even conversely, mixing that with, so what do you love about working here? And what are the things that, no place is perfect. What would you change? Will they be honest with you about that too? So that gets a little less cliche. So I think you just feel it out. If all of your questions are on that level, you're probably in trouble. I don't think it's not wrong to have a cliche question, because sometimes they're cliche for a reason you want to find out. But if every question was that, then you have some more pressing business needs in there too. Who had the cliche question? Remind me, what was the question exactly again, so we can address that? Cross. Let me tell you about what not to say. So you should always ask questions, but you should never ask questions that are selfish. What that means is pretend that how many of you have a friend who likes to talk about themselves? Come on, we all do. That might, if you're not raising your hand, I'm not looking, it might be you. No, but we all have pretend it's that person. It's all about them. It's all about them. When they give you the offer, then it becomes about you. But at this point, never dare you never ask questions about salary, benefits, things of that nature. Wait for them to say we want you first before you start asking them about those things. So those are things not to say, for sure. Never ever badmouth anybody. All of you have had a professor you did not get along with, or a boss. That's a given. Don't say anything bad about them, because the interviewer is going to be thinking, well, the way you talked about your last boss makes me think in 3 years when you've left me, you're going to talk about me that way, because Lord knows I'm not perfect either, right? So be careful how you articulate that, because those things will be really noticed. So watch what you position. That's why I love that ethics question, because it sounds like you took a really tense situation and presented it positively, which is really awesome. So.
We're running out of time, but I did want to talk a little bit about phone interviews, just because that's a real experience that I've had. My biggest challenge in phone interviews is you don't have the body language, right? So everything we just talked about out the window, because it doesn't matter. So it's almost like you have to listen to their voice,
Like tone language.
those tone things to pick up on. And like I said before, I'm really prone to talking. And so another one of my challenges is not talking over them, because you're not really sure when they're going to stop speaking. So I think for me, it's been giving myself permission for those awkward pauses, because I'd rather have a little space of silence rather than speaking over them. So listen carefully, take that time to make sure that they're looking for you to respond. And it's okay to acknowledge, oh, I'm sorry, I talked over you. Can you repeat again? Because everyone knows that phone conversations are a little awkward. But more than that, you guys might find more commonly, and I don't know if any of you have this experience, Skype interviews. I've had a couple of those as well. That's a whole new spectrum of things now. The generation is going to be real. So it's very much like the in-person interview, I think the biggest thing, especially for us, is there's people around that might not know that you're in an interview. So I know I've been in houses where there's 5 girls living there. So I have to be really intentional about making sure I get into a space, I get into a closed room, that the Wi-Fi works, that I test my Skype address, that I make sure I get their Skype address, and I'm there like 20 minutes before, making sure like the screen's set up. Because nothing's worse than already being nervous for an interview, and then the little camera on your computer isn't working. It's so awkward. I've had that happen.
Test
before.
it with somebody beforehand.
So test it, make sure you know how to use Skype. Sometimes they don't know how to use Skype, and that's really funny. So at least if you can show that you're the person that knows how to use the technology, like if you've never used it before, review that. So I just want to throw that out.
In addition, a couple things for phone. You have to know what the purpose of the phone interview is. Typically, it's a screening interview. So it's shorter. It's going to be 20, maybe 30 minutes, sometimes 45, but 20 to 30. And they're going to go fast. They just want to quickly see, are you worth bringing on site? It's most likely going to be the recruiter, not the hiring manager. The recruiter knows enough about the position, but doesn't actually live with it day to day. And so because it's on the phone, you also need to keep your answers a lot shorter. 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes on the phone sounds like an eternity. So go a little faster on the phone. I always spread out my notes, so I will have my answers to questions right in front of me. It's an open book test, folks. So get nice and comfortable, put on your slippers, party on top, casual on the bottom. Party on the bottom, business on top. And then it's shorter. That was one other tip. Oh, I often stand up and have a headset so you can project your voice so you sound confident. You need to be particularly able to project your voice on the phone, because if they can't hear you, they might not tell you, and you're probably one of 8 phone interviews they do that day. Maybe you're number 5, so it's easy to tune you out. So you have to project your voice and be confident. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Use a mirror.
Oh yeah.
Use a mirror.
Tech interviews, Susie, do you want to cover that one?
So, tech interviews, is there anybody else think that they may be in a technical interview, something a little more involved in problem-solving potential technical questions?
Okay, a couple.
Okay, so there's a few of them. So, in the technical interview, it's best to, it's going to be looked at the problem-solving process, not necessarily if you get the problem, if you get the answer right. So if you can show your problem-solving process from beginning to end, how you came up with that conclusion, that's what they're going to be looking for.
So that's why whiteboards are often used, or it's like that kind of great cliche from Microsoft, the famous whiteboard thing. They don't just want to see, did you get the right answer? Sometimes the question they may give you you might not be able to get the answer in that amount of time. They want to see your thought process, or they give you the problem ahead of time, and so you hopefully have the right answer, right? And they might just ask you, okay, so I've got your problem in front of me, tell me how you work this out. And what they don't want to see is the genius who can just solve it, because they want to see your process and how you thought through it logically. So whiteboards are great. Practice on the whiteboard. Break the problem down and show them how you went from piece to piece. Actually, that works really, really well for non-technical interviews too, if you can talk about your thought process, not just, I made this happen. But for technical folks, I can't tell you how to, the actual technical things, but in terms, as you're preparing and looking at examples, practice them out loud so you can articulate. That's the biggest thing, and be able to show your thought process. Some questions are silly, and there might not actually be an answer. They just want to see, can you think? Is what they're really getting at. One of the best things you can do in an interview is imagine, why the heck is the interviewer asking me this question? Well, they asked you to tell them about yourself. Tell me about yourself. Okay, well, maybe they're asking because it's a nice lead-in question to break the ice. Or it's an open-ended question and they could just see where you go with it, and you might take them places that kind of show things about you that they weren't allowed to ask, and hey, shows you're a bad candidate, right? Or maybe they just want to actually get to know you personally. So there's a variety of reasons. If you can quickly think through, oh, here's 3 reasons why they might be asking me that question, you can then address it.
And keep it at 3. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Questions like, why did they ask me that?
And that's what I'd say for some of those common interview questions when you're preparing. A great one is, tell me about your week, a time you failed. Well, why would they ask you that? Are you self-aware? Do you actually know when you failed? Have you processed through that? You can think of a half dozen reasons. So think about that. Then you craft your response, and then you go in there able to address the reason they're asking for it. You had a question again. Mark?
Oh, no, I was.
We should
I didn't have a
maybe
question.
take one
That's
more
okay.
question or something.
Cool, yeah, one more question, then we'll let Tiffany close us off.
Well, maybe with sure nothing pressing down. Confidence, impression, comfort, all of that is based on you're starting building that by being here. You have now notes and stuff that you can build on, and you're gonna have your stories, and preparing for that is gonna prep you and give you more confidence when you walk into that interview. And hold your head up. And one quick thing, which is kind of fun, if you look up this TED Talk, it's on power poses. Look it up, it's pretty cool. You stand in the mirror like this for 2 minutes. Wonder Woman, Macho Man, you know, do that. Yeah,
It's a real thing.
TED Talk, power pose. 2 minutes before you go to the interview.
So yeah, I know you guys gotta get to class. I want to thank you so much. I know what it means for a college student to take an hour and a half out of your day. So thank you so much for committing to this. I want to thank you guys too for listening to me and Susie letting us have this experience. Because like a little bit of what we do as a part of our program, we're research assistants for Daniel. And like we said before, it's a business management program with an emphasis on social and sustainable management. So we get to learn about how to use business to create social change. I don't like business, and I'm in this program because I don't like business and I want to use it to make change in the world. So I just want to plug in, if you're sitting there thinking, talking about interviews and I don't even know what the heck I want to do with my life, that was me, and that's why I'm doing this program. We get to work with Daniel all the time, learn about this stuff, and get a competitive edge from the rest of our peers, learn how to dress, learn how to talk, learn how to present, everything that no one ever teaches you, plus business too. And we get to do it all in the context of working with people. So I'm never sitting in a library reading a textbook. I'm always with other people interacting. So if you find yourself sick of the library, but I want to learn more, but I just want to do, I'm a doer, so that's why I did this program. If you're interested at all, we would love to talk to you about it. We put our business cards right there, grab them, and you have the brochures and everything. And also, like, our business cards aren't just there if you want to learn more about the program. If you have any questions or just want someone to practice interviewing with, we're SPU students too. We want to support you, so don't be afraid to reach out to us too.
And they have slick business cards.
Yeah.
All the program happens in 1 year, so everything they talk about is in 1 year. Thanks for having us today. This was awesome. We're here to chat. Thank you.